today to understand what neoliberalism is, because many of the progressives in our community say they want to fight against neoliberalism. Yet when we try to expose how to defeat neoliberalism through an understanding of MMT, they come back and they say that's magic money, or they come back and say something else thoroughly ridiculous that just completely says, I may say I'm against neoliberalism, but I'm actually a staunch supporter of neoliberalism. Can you please explain what neoliberalism is and how MMT can sate that? I mean, give your historical lessons as well, for sure, in this, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So every man and his dog has a definition of neoliberalism. So I won't, profess that I have some objective definition. I think for our purposes, the line that I find that sort of characterizes neoliberalism to me is that line from The Usual Suspects, which is the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. And so what I think about neoliberalism is that it is an ideology that is unique in the sense that it denies it is an ideology. So it's like when somebody says the only thing that I can't stand is intolerance. The only ideology I can't stand is the one that pretends it isn't an ideology. So the neoliberalist ideology for me is one that tries to propose there is a unique answer to the question of the messiness of politics, right? It's sort of trying to say that we've had left-handers and right-handers fighting forever about which hand is best. And the answer is it's feet. They want to pretend like the problem isn't a real problem. And for me, that is an issue because there really are stories of bad people and good people. There are people that do things that hurt people, and there are people that stop those things from happening. And when you try to sort of say, it's all the same, it's all much of a muchness, it's aren't we all a little bit guilty of everything? You draw this sort of moral equivalence between things that are not the same. And that, to me, is what neoliberalism does to its excellent degree. It says, well, okay, maybe there's fascists, and maybe there's people who believe in free healthcare and childcare and free education. Let's call them socialists. And look, they're both basically the same. One's extreme left and one's extreme right. One wants children who identify with a different gender than that they were assigned at birth to have the right to go to whatever bathroom they want. And the other one wants to burn crosses on black people's lawns. It's the same. It's the same thing. And they kind of have this resigned cynicism towards believing in anything, towards believing that anything can be different than what we have today. This is not just the end of history. This is the end of there being a next step in any conversation worth having. So the challenge becomes trying to get people to believe that there can be big things different tomorrow than there were today. So this, to go to your exact question, Steve, the problem with MMT is MMT pierces the veil that neoliberalism has put on political discourse. So what neoliberalism has said is you can have any policy you want as long as every time you take a little bit, you have to give a little bit. So every time you want to pay Peter, you have to rob Paul. And what this has guaranteed is that there is never a conversation about growth. There is never a conversation about which kind of growth is best or which kind of approach delivers more growth. The only conversation that happens is whose head do we have to stand on to get ourselves a little bit higher? And so that conversation is premised on the idea that we have a scarce amount of stuff. It's a fixed pie mentality, which is why the idea of a government that needs to ultimately pay back all of its debt is so valuable to that story. Because that old line, there's no such thing as a free lunch, means that if the government wants to spend, it has to take it out of your pocket, or if it borrows, it has to take it out of someone else's pocket. So the idea that government borrowing is taking stuff away from other people is fundamental to the neoliberal worldview that nothing is growing. If there was 10 today, there's 10 tomorrow, there'll be 10,000 years from now. The idea that there could be 12 next week is just crazy. That is the thing that the MMT analysis debunks, because it explains that when you issue new treasury debt, you are issuing new net financial assets. You're reducing the supply of money, so to speak, supply of monetary instruments issued by the government from 10 to 12. Then the question is there going to be inflation? And the answer is probably not. If you increase the spending in the economy, just add more money from the government for goods or services, as long as there is spare capacity to produce those goods and services, there's no reason to expect inflation to occur. So what you end up being able to show is that it's not that there was a free lunch necessarily, but that we were didn't know we were wasting. And that's what MMT reveals, is that the biggest so-called free lunch, or the biggest waste, is all of the people we are keeping unemployed by our deliberate decisions. That is a huge amount we are leaving on the table every day of potential economic growth, or at the very least, just preventing economic decline. So one of my law professors used to say, and I like this line, the biggest economic inefficiency in human history is the wastage of human brains.